Good morning once again. My name is Stefka Domosova. I am part of Climate Cake as well as part of the VALORADA project. We in Climate Cake, together with my colleague Michelle, who organized this webinar, are in charge of organizing the capacity building around the VALORADA project. And so I will give you some context very briefly about the project. So VALORADA is a project that deals with data, with local available data such as socioeconomic data and any other data. And we look into how we can combine that with other data, notably Earth observation data, in order to satisfy the specific adaptation needs that our demonstrators around Europe can have. In this context, today we will be talking about local data management and spaces, spaces. We have three notable speakers with us. I would be happy to introduce them. We have Monika Krzyżanowska, who is a seismologist by background and is currently a director of business development at Cloudflare. She has experience in business development and in companies such as Creotech Instruments, NBIT, and the Polish branch of Thales. Her expertise includes the Copernicus data space ecosystem, which we would hear more today, as well as situational awareness from space. Monika is also a member of the board of directors at ERSC and the Gaia X committee of the Polish Chambers of Information Technology and Telecommunications. We also have Giacomo Martirano today, who has background in electronic engineering and is co-founder and CTO of Epsilon Italia, which is a SME active in the geospatial sector and notably in European and international projects. Giacomo is an expert in Inspire implementation and has been involved in design and deployment of location data interoperability solutions. He has also worked on standardizations such as co-chairing the OGC's compliance and interoperability testing and evaluation program subcommittee. Since 2015, Giacomo is also an external consultant at the DG JRC of the European Commission. Within the usage project, which we will hear more about, he's also responsible for metadata management within territorial development. And he also has background in technical guidelines for the implementation of the Common Agricultural Policy. Last but not least, and in order of speakers first, we will start today with Natalia Opere, who is a researcher at the Lisbon Council and a fellow of public management at the SDI Bocconi School of Management. She's focusing her research on public services, governance, and the role of digital technologies. She has also contributed to several research projects, such as the COBOL project, the INGO project, and is currently leading the usage project, which is the Urban Green Data Spaces for Greenville. Natalia holds a PhD in comparative and European politics from the University of Vienna. Before I give Natalia the floor, I would like to bring up a couple of house rules. First of all, we would have the three speakers presenting one after another. If you have any questions in the meantime, please use the Q&A function to ask them. We will be able to answer them during our Q&A session after the three presentations. And after the Q&A session, we also have an interactive exercise to figure out our common understanding of data spaces after the webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for your time. Without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Natalia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefka. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I will try to share my screen so that we can follow together the presentation that I have for today. I would like, first of all, to thank you for being here. And what I will try to speak today with you is about the urban data space for European Green Deal through the perspective of the usage project. And before we delve into this, I think there are some sort of mysterious, at least to some of our audience participants, concepts here. So I will try to start with those there. So first of all, let me start by saying that the European Union has produced in the last years a couple of very important policy tools that help us today to delve into the topic of that we are discussing. So the first one that we need to put as the cornerstone is the European data strategy that was launched in 2020 that marks the so-called digital transition and whose aim is to fully take advantage of the potential of data-driven innovation in the European Union. And one of the most important concepts, at least among those that were launched at that moment, was the so-called creation of common European data spaces. And we will get back to what a common European data space is in the next minutes. A year before the launch of the European data strategy, the European Union has launched one of the most ambitious policies that aims to bring the European continent to climate neutrality by 2050, and we know it as the European Green Deal. This sets the so-called green transition of the European Union and aims to take advantage of environmental and climate challenges to turn them into economic opportunities. And different policy areas have been configured there that in a way help us to understand how they can exploit the power of data. And the last thing that is important to say here is that 74% of the population in Europe lives in cities, and 70% of the legislation that I just mentioned is actually implemented at the city level, which means that the cities actually have an important role in this mission of both digital and green transition, the so-called twin transition. And so they have a leading role, but not doing this alone. So first of all, what we need to emphasize is that cities are not alone and should activate the participation of different stakeholders group. And at the same time, trying to exploit the potential of data to effectively support these Green Deal actions at the local level. So the question is, how can actually data spaces enable cities, if they can do so, and I will try to convince you that they do, to realize the European Green Deal ambitions? So this question has been at the, let's say, at the outset of the usage project. We've been, let's say, trying to answer successfully this question for the last 2.5 years. We are almost coming to its end in July this year. And what is the main aim of this project? It is to enable universal access to data, so city-level data, both environmental and climate, following FAIR principles. So FAIR, we mean findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. And to do so, we are not reinventing the wheel. This is very important to say. What we did was, on one side, is to evaluate what is already existing in the cities, so in terms of data, architecture, components, and on top of them, develop standard-based solutions. These solutions were decided to be piloted and validated in 4 middle-sized cities. So we talk about Ferrara in Italy, Graz in Austria, Leuven in Belgium, and Spain, Saragossa in Spain. And I would like to stress that we are talking about middle-sized cities because very often in these initiatives, so both green and digital, let's say, initiatives, we very often hear big cities, champion cities like London, Copenhagen, Madrid, Milan, Paris, and we know that we are talking about both different kind of sizes, resources, and also potential there. Whereas in Usage Project, we are trying to realize this in 4 middle-sized cities, which of course have different configuration, but also different challenges. So what was one of our first aims in this project was, first of all, to understand what a data space is. So when we started in delving into this question in 2023, there was no data space definition, let's say, developed. So what we did was to interview experts at the European Union level to understand what it is for them, the concept of data space. And the first thing that we understood is that it is, while for the experts in the field it was not a novel concept, for other stakeholders, even when we were trying to speak with local level actors, they were a bit unclear what the data space concept is. So first of all, the thing that we learned was that it is still at the early stage of realization. The second thing is that we are not talking necessarily only about a technological solution. So the data space concepts go beyond the technological solution, and it involves an ecosystem of actors. So this is the first thing that we have learned. This ecosystem of actors has one purpose. First of all, to share data. So how do we collect, use, and share data is an important aim, but that is done under several, let's say, shared governance principles. So who does what, under what roles and responsibilities. And to do so, they need to sort of distribute and agree on what legal and technical tools do they have to follow. So what I would like to stress here is that we are talking about a holistic approach that addresses both governance, data governance, and technical considerations that aims to facilitate not only a more structured, but also flexible data sharing and use. And I think on that account, Giacomo will give you more details. Meanwhile, the Data Space Support Center, which is now one of the, let's say, reference point, has issued, I think, a quite accessible and understandable definition that means that the data space is a decentralized infrastructure which follows the governance principles, standards, practices, and services that support data transaction between participants. So once we have defined the data space concept, we said, okay, so let's get into action. And what we did was first three main things, right? I have tried to summarize them here. Of course, 3 years of work is not easy to summarize, but first of all, we tried to understand what was the context of our cities. So in terms of policies, because all the cities, and I think many also those who are not necessarily middle-sized, but also small cities, have already a long track of climate and environmental policies, but also some attempts of digital and data policies. They have also very often have deployed some architecture and systems. The problem is that they sometimes are not integrated necessarily, or they don't speak to each other, or they are fragmented and have very, let's say, complex ways to exchange data. And the last thing that we did was to sort of understand and activate the stakeholders in the sense of understanding their needs and challenges on one side, but also activate their experience and knowledge in terms of collaborating with different actors, because in all these cities, there is already a network of collaboration with academia, with private actors, so we needed to activate those. So based on all this initial work, I would like to report you some results. So what we did was to understand the challenges, so the climatic challenges, because on top of that, so based on the challenges that were there understood, we could develop the solutions. Then we tried to prioritize those challenges into the strategies that were already there, so policy. Then based on the needs of stakeholders, and when we talk stakeholders, we are referring both to municipality stakeholders, but also external to municipality stakeholders, so organization, private actors, but also utilities, and to understand how can the potential value of data can be exploited in these cases. So, for instance, I'm sure that many cities fight or tackle the same problems that us, that are urban heat island challenges, floodings, access to green, where to deploy the best actions in terms of interventions. And what we also observed was that very often in these cities, we found either a sectorized approach to, let's say, encapsulate the challenges, in the sense that there were some policy instruments per sector, right? So mobility, energy, buildings. And in other cases, we saw an advancement towards a more integrated approach towards climate change actions. And the last thing that we are now noticing is even the mainstreaming of this action into the general urban planning. And I'm sure that many local stakeholders know are now transitioning from the urban planning as just seeing the city through the development lens, and now integrating the climate changing, mainstreaming the climate change topics into these general urban planning. And in terms of stakeholders' need, it was interesting to find that they have different challenges and need. We tried to cluster them here. It's just a glimpse of what we found, but they mentioned legal challenges and needs in terms of agreements, rules of data exchange. They also spoke about organizational needs in the sense of harmonizing how data is collected, used, and managed, because very often they were speaking that they receive data from a regional agency through the attachment of the Excel file. So that is not the optimum, let's say, way of collecting data. They also spoke about informational needs in the sense to integrate available data across different information systems, because they were there, but they were not necessarily talking to each other. And finally, they also spoke about technical needs in the sense of improving the interoperability and standardization of the data use, data models, but also the need for visualization tools, because that would mean to support the decision-making process and the policy-making in those urban contexts. So on that account, they spoke that we need to move beyond the use of data only for monitoring purposes, and rather to use it for the agenda setting stage. So we are actually defining problems based on the data that we are using. And not last, I would say quite important, is to use the different sources of data to actually formulate actions, policy actions at the local level. I will skip the left side of this slide just because, of course, we have developed use cases based on what on that research part. But I would like to stress here that thanks to all the solutions that were deployed, and that part is going to be covered by Giacomo in the next minutes, we are now able to say that we have provided an answer and a solution for strategic and policy making needs, for technical needs, and also informational needs, because now, based on the different solutions developed, we can actually guide the urban planning and investments in greening actions, in spotting critical areas and sectors that have the highest potential of decarbonization. We are also providing standard-based and interoperable data and metadata, but also easily deployable and reusable tools, and not least, informational needs in terms of actually raising awareness across the citizenry and provide data-driven and accessible visualization. And to conclude, I would like to stress that data spaces have the potential to support data-driven actions to tackle climate challenge. So this is the first answer to our question, provided that they ensure accurate and updated information throughout the entire policymaking process, and that we are talking about the collaboration of different city stakeholders, actors, and that, of course, ensures that the data models and the tools that are developed in cities can be replicated across different other cities, so that we don't reinvent necessarily the wheel. This is the purpose of the data spaces. And the last thing that I would say, and I think the Data Space Support Center goes toward that idea, is that data spaces need to be federated across the regional, national, and European level, and that they are connected among each other. So thank you so much. I hope I have been quite in time to leave the floor to the next presentation, and I'm, of course, quite keen to start the discussion and interaction with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalia, for this very interesting presentation. I would remind everyone to put their questions in the Q&A section or keep them for our session later. I would like to give the floor to Giacomo, who would show us a practical study of what an urban data space is, how it looks like and what it does.
Thank you, Stefka, and also Natalia for introducing. say, different slides, what I'm going to present now. So we enter into more technical details and of the usage project. I think that it's very clear the policy context that Natalia introduced, leading to, let's say, several approaches and solutions to implement what has been driven by policy demands. What is important to highlight is that for those of you that probably are not extremely familiar with the concept of data spaces, another important point of our project is that currently data spaces are going to be deployed in Europe according to specific sectors or domains. We have 14 currently being ongoing, and but with our urban data space, we are going to be really cross-domain and let's say localized at an urban level. So this is another challenge that we took and hopefully overcome. So let's go into following up what Natalia presented. Now let's see some, let's say, facts and figures of usage. First of all, we can say that we are prototyping 4 urban data spaces in 4 pilot cities, medium size, as very correctly Natalia pointed out, which are Ferrara in Italy, Zaragoza in Spain, Graz in Austria, and Leuven in Belgium. 11 use cases addressing 3 European Green Deal policy areas covered by local Green Deal or so-called city contracts, and Natalia gave let's say the specific domain context as urban islands, floods, support to photovoltaic installation, or nature-based solution. A policy-driven use case conceptual model that I will show you in a while, very important because we are, let's say, trying to standardize as much as possible the approach in order to facilitate the reuse, of course. In that respect, also the use of a business process model and notation standard to represent the workflows that each use case has followed. A geo-network-based catalog. This is the address that you can find also in the project website that was shared in the chat, which is currently publishing 426 datasets metadata and 62 metadata for tools and algorithms. Natalia mentioned the template, let's say the need to go in this direction, and these are numbers witnessing how much work has been done. This catalog, very importantly, is harvesting existing CCAN open data catalog, so based on infrastructures already available in the pilot cities, allowing editing of new metadata using ISO 19115 standard-based templates, and adopting also a procedure to document properly, in this case in the lineage field, semantic and syntactic requirements for new datasets, and how to document in a structured way all the requirements coming from the policy-driven use cases. But then, again, a GeoServer instance, currently providing access to 85 workspaces with 224 layers, through view and download OGC web services, which are, let's say, used for expert users, but then using GeoCatBridge QGIS plugin to facilitate dataset publication in QGIS, which is a typical GIS desktop environment, and also enabling a data storage through a web accessible folder for internal data sharing of raw data, which are unpublished through the services. These aspects are very important because in the meanwhile usage project and other projects are going to be, let's say, executed and approaching also the end at the European level, and primarily the Data Space Support Center with a huge community is also working a lot with the so-called connectors or components to let's say, to deploy a data space, which in some aspects are still at an architectural level, of course, more, let's say, robust in terms of support to all the data spaces which are currently under the deployment phase. But just to show that with these, let's say, in some cases off the shelf, in other cases with some customization of open source solutions, we are already deploying. No, this is an example. These prototypes are fully functioning already, and all these connectors are being implemented with these solutions. Semantic harmonization of decision-ready information, and decision-ready information is an output of each use case. So the information which is ready to support decision makers according to documented data models, which is also part of the FAIR principles. Decision-ready information, as already Natalia mentioned, effectively shared to decision makers and citizens through HTML pages, user stories, and other more easily understandable formats. An urban data space validation approach focused on use cases, on real cases. And finally, a data space validation dashboard, which collects 18 indicators, some of them KPIs defined at project level, at proposal level, to measure the several impacts required by the call for proposal, but also additional indicators to validate the so-called usage approach. And last but not least, the ongoing, in order to be fully aligned with what Europe is doing in that respect, it's ongoing a mapping of the 4 prototype data spaces toward the so-called technical building blocks and non-technical, namely business and organizational building blocks of the data space support center blueprint. I put here now version 2.0 because we started this alignment with the previous versions, even the 1.0, then the 1.1, because there is a fast evolution from the data space support center. This is what I mentioned before, the conceptual use case, the conceptual model, which you see in green, how all the steps, let's say, witnessing how strongly we are linked from the policy aspects, so from the European Green Deal to the local Green Deal or city contract, contained in strategies, plans, or regulations adopted at city level, defining, identifying the challenges and priorities, implemented by use cases. And then each use case is made by a series of so-called processing steps. And then you can see on the top line and on the bottom 2 parallel lines, in the purple color, all let's say, information to be collected through metadata in terms of tools and algorithms to allowing to execute the processing steps. And then, of course, tools and algorithms operating on input data and generating output data documented through metadata. Important to mention that there are several intermediate steps, as we will see in a while, for each to implement each use case according to a precise workflow. But the last processing step is always producing an output data, which is one or more output data which are classified as decision-ready information. If you refer also to the diagram, the architectural diagram that Natalia showed. This is what I mentioned in terms of BPMN. You see here on the left side, not readable, but a full workflow from a starting point until an endpoint. And then just to see here one detail focusing on this, each lane here is a processing step modeled according to the conceptual model showed before. And then to see in orange, there are the description of the processing steps with a link to metadata of the specific tool or algorithm allowing to execute the steps, some not here. And then as an output, the output data of each step, which with this purple background represent the decision-ready information with a link to the corresponding metadata to contain all the information required. In terms of, in terms of validation approach, Since the beginning, now this approach is also evolving because we are considering, meanwhile, the project is approaching the end. But since the beginning, we identified the importance not to focus only on technological aspects, because as also Natalia highlighted many times, there are governance aspects, organizational aspects to be properly to be taken into account. And then we simulated since the beginning an urban data space board made by members, and each one sometimes different roles covered by the same person, but just to identify the respective, let's say, areas of competence: a decision maker, a policy expert, a technology expert, a data expert, a legal expert, the citizens, and also an economy expert, because also we are for several exploitable results, and also at a data space level, we are, let's say, drafting business models for also short to long-term sustainability of the prototype data spaces. Here you see examples of questions that are used for self-assessing or mutually assessing as an exercise what the board, the members of the board of Ferrara are assessing what the colleagues are doing in Zaragoza, and vice versa, in order to try to capture all the key aspects to be monitored, to be assessed in the deployment of a data space, ranging from if the decision-ready information is really supporting the decisions, or if the costs are sustainable besides the project lifetime, and if the technology is suitable to produce the solutions, and so on. Finally, this is the so-called validation board, in which you see, this is a screenshot. For all the 4 pilot cities, you see only 2 for sake of readability. We have these 18 indicators. Some of them, all of them are normalized in order to provide this figure. Ideally, here we are measuring for each indicator. We have a clear definition, a procedure to measure, and then to measure each indicator, and then also a target value. And then we measure that progressively, iteratively, the distance to target. So ideally, if each data space will perform at the best of its possibilities, this diagram will be only 1 point at the center, meaning that the distance to target is 0. So every indicator reached is target. Of course, we are normalizing the indicators in order to provide a common, let's say, way of representation. And just to mention that we are indicators taking into account more technical aspects like the fairness ratio, control vocabulary ratio, high-value datasets ratio, findability in the project catalog or in data.europa.eu, to more, let's say, here skills, if the data space has adequate, the people participating has adequate skills to deploy and operate in time the data space. If the formally has been set up according to, for instance, Ferrara already is assigning agreements according to which several actors covering several roles will interact each other to solve all the organizational aspects, to other aspects like the suitability of the data models, the technologies, and also of the business model. So let's say in short, this is the more technical and detailed aspects of the prototyping of these urban data spaces that Natalia presented, in terms of where all this work originated from, strongly linked to European, let's say, policy priority areas of the Green Deal, but then, let's say, projected at urban level according to the local Green Deals. And with this, I conclude. Thank you for your attention, and happy to reply to your questions.
Thank you very much, Giacomo. Maybe we can take the questions after Monica's presentation, then we can have time to discuss things more systemically. So indeed, I would like to pass the floor to Monica, who would present us with an overview of the Copernicus data space ecosystem.
Do you see my presentation right now, or?
Yes, we see it very well.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Michelle, Stefka. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I have prepared a lot of slides, but mostly because I think they may come useful later on. Yeah, so we will not go through all the slides. Just start very quickly with. Can I switch the slide? Yeah. Very quickly with the current situation. We are drowning in the abundance of data. We have too much data to look into it, and we expect those data to comply with some specific expectations. What is also very important is the fact that normally users don't want the data anymore. I think they want information. So this is quite important, an important aspect. So we are now diving into Copernicus data space ecosystem. So we have heard about the data spaces, about the more dedicated data spaces for cities. That could be probably, I guess this is a question, but I assume it would be replicated for other cities maybe. And then below, we have a very horizontal wealth of space data that is really meant to serve almost any kind of data space. Maybe not manufacturing of cars, and then I'm not 100% sure. Just very quickly, a reminder about the Copernicus program, which is a program where European Union sent a constellation of satellites. And this is really the constellation of satellites because they are well formatted. They are you can easily understand what happened to the data. So usually the Copernicus data, or in fact Sentinel, because Copernicus is a program, Sentinel is the name of the data. So usually those data are considered as a reference set of the data. When you go to the high resolution data, to various constellations, usually you get very nice resolution, very fine information, but then it's a bit more difficult to compare them. So when you have the Copernicus, you are in a reference data. What's a space ecosystem in this context? Because as you saw on the previous slide, we expect this Copernicus data space ecosystem to serve various horizontal data spaces, in particular meant for the Green Deal, of course. So Copernicus data space ecosystem is first of all Sentinel data, so this constellation of free open data. Then we have Copernicus contributing missions. Then we have additional Earth observation data and a set of tools. Because as we said, we don't want anymore to be forced to look into each scene, each, let's say, image separately. We need information, especially. So, and then this ecosystem is open for additional services that are maybe not present right now, but that are expected to come. Well, about the Copernicus and Sentinel constellations, I already said those are Sentinel satellites. Besides bringing a wealth of information that is difficult to judge just looking by the naked eye on it, they are very beautiful. Yeah. So we have optical satellites. We have various level of programs because we have the raw data, but we even in this Copernicus data space ecosystem, we already have some aggregation, some pre-processing of the data that allows later on applications to exploit them more easily. Usually what we are trying to do is a European Commission and all the consortium of CDSE, what we are trying to do, we try to prepare the data in such a way that everyone who brings in an application can use them easily and that they will fit several applications. I mean, it's open source, and the standards are open. So we want to have the reuse, yes, of the data. Okay, so we said CDSE is not just the raw data. Sentinel data are very nice and they are well configured, but we have also contributing missions, because usually Sentinel data resolution is not very high. It cannot compete with commercial data. So European Union also makes available some amount of higher resolution data. Then there are policies, so not everyone and not always can access them, but usually administrations can get access to those data. This is Naples, by the way, from Pleiades, from Airbus. Well, the plan is very ambitious. You have here at the top of the screen, you have the link for the contributing missions collections, availability and plans, when they will be available, what is available. So, because I wouldn't like to go too much into detail right now about it. So we have those contributing data, and we have just shortly listed additional data. It can be also satellite data from other constellations like Landsat, American constellation. There can be processed data like land cover. Land cover means we classify if it's buildings or if it's crops, what type of crops. There are several collections that can be available, and that are growing. How to access those data? Well, just to let you know that they are APIs, so interfaces with which you can access the data from your application. The whole idea is that you don't download the data anymore, but that everyone accesses the same collection. Yeah, this is a graphic that illustrates this advantage, this idea that you don't download the data to your own computer, because the collections are just huge. I mean, it would be difficult to process them. You need a lot of processing power, and using this type of solution, you can just share it with other users. Well, other way of accessing the data is a Copernicus browser, which is a very nice tool to use. I think that I will try now to share with you. I will try to switch the screen, because I would like to. I would like just to show you. Do you see my the browser now?
We do. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So I would just like to show you that if you go to the web portal of the Copernicus data space ecosystem, you can use the Copernicus browser. I have already opened it, and you can select an area. Here I have selected Warsaw because this is where I am speaking to you from. You can see that if I selected optical data and I'd like to have them with not too much clouds, the last Warsaw is not a very well. Our climate is not very. We have a lot of clouds and quite humid usually. So the last almost cloud-free picture was on the 13th of April, and I can then select various functions, even just not knowing very much what about processing. I can see here that we have a bit of vegetation in Warsaw. We have our Vistula River here, and non-vegetation right now unclassified. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. I hope you have now back my presentation. But I encourage you when you have time to go into it. Okay. Then we have programming is difficult for the Earth observation data. So this is just to let you know that this Copernicus data space ecosystem has really a number of tools that helps programming. It's not really meant for end user, because we cannot all learn to program, but nevertheless, even as you see, you can easily select some kind of pre-process data and display and try to understand. There are also Jupyter Lab and other tools that enable you to make it much more easy to program. Then, well, as I said, we need cloud computing capacity, and with Copernicus data space ecosystem comes a number of commercial services, not only data, but as well processing power. Very easily you can use Cloudflare, the system clouds, if you want to process more than just a little bit, or use more data, or do a bit more than just check the data and then do the simplest processing. Then you can just go into the commercial world, because this Copernicus data space ecosystem is an open ecosystem where you have the EU sponsored, so paid by everyone, of constellation data, and you have some commercial services which are designed and assembled in such a way that you can quite easily use them. So this ecosystem is permanently growing. It's a snapshot of a web page, because normally the best informations are and the most recent are on the web page, and it's changing very quickly. But where do we want to go with this CDSE? Well, we want to have this public data, but we want to have commercial data. By we, I mean all the Copernicus community, yes, and Copernicus services. And we want to attract a number of applications of commercial solution, and not only, that would serve various data spaces. Well, also urban planning, also public health. So this is our ambition. To show you one more thing, I would like just to switch once more. What is also worthwhile is to, if you are interested, to get a subscription of the Copernicus Data Space Ecosystem newsletter. Well, I know that we are getting so much information that it's difficult, but just to browse quickly what's going on, what data are available, even if you are not a data scientist, is nice to know the acronyms, the words, the language of the data, because I don't think we will avoid having to use at some point the Copernicus data space. And I think this is what I wanted to tell you. Maybe to conclude, I would just like to say that I'm presenting it because Cloudflare is one of the partners in the Copernicus Data Space Consortium, and we are operating the data repository catalog and data access. And we provide some of the commercial services that are available to every user, but we are not the only ones. You have also Synergize, you have the systems, you have various aspects, including artificial intelligence environments. I think this is when I wanted to stop. It was a really very quick presentation, but I think if people who are more interested would just go to the web page, and well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monica. Thank you, everyone. I think we have wrapped up our round of presentations for now. I'll be happy to kick off the questions. I would like to ask, well, maybe let's start from Monica, who just has been speaking. And I was wondering, because you presented the Copernicus data space ecosystem as this very versatile tool that can be used by a lot of different types of stakeholders, from the private, the public sector. I was wondering, how do you, as part of the consortium creating that, how do you gather the user requirements of such a versatile users? And how are they integrated then into this? Because you presented it as a very user-friendly tool. I mean, as much as Earth observation data can be user-friendly, but it would be interesting to hear a little bit more about it.
It's a challenge, of course. But we are we are listening to the users. First, of course, there is the Commission and all the European Space Agency community that brings expectations, and sometimes together we discuss directions. While the CDSC and then the commercial services behind have got ticketing system. And when a user tells us, I would like to download, or I would like to do this, or how can I do it? We just take it into account and we look into it. Is it possible? Is it only one use case? Is it easy to do? Then we discuss with the Commission, because you have to remember, I didn't cover the governance aspect because it was a bit discussed before by Natalia. But the governance aspect for those data is very important. Imagine that we are in a situation when Europe invested in a wonderful constellation. We are giving the data for free, but for the application level, we still have to develop a little bit. So we have to balance somehow collaboration on the global level, yes, and putting forward and facilitating the use of the data, well, to European users. Somehow Europe seems to be a bit closer. So we try to listen, and we propose various things.
Thank you, Monica. It's nice to see that there's these different interactions ongoing and there's this sort of feedback system that you try to integrate. And talking about challenges, maybe I'll go back to Natalia or Giacomo, and I would like to ask you a little bit about the multi-sectorial approach that you have adopted in usage. And I'm wondering, would you see that possible to be implemented in other similar cities across Europe, for instance? And if so, what would you see as potential challenges in doing that? And also, if you can tell us a little bit about your, I'm sure, very interesting experience and challenges in getting local stakeholders on board with doing that. Thank you.
So maybe I can first reply, and Natalia can complement also for her part. Let's say that the replicability, the usability is one of the must of our approaches. Let's say, starting from the bottom, we have a KPI and an indicator to measure within the project lifetime that at least 10 other cities will, let's say, reuse to some extent our approach, meaning starting from initial agreements to deploy data space to reuse a specific solution for specific use cases. Let's say that, of course, there is no matter about the size of the city, because it can be even large sites, no matter, because the approach is robust enough to, let's say, to be deployed in any kind of city or urban areas or even rural areas. Let's say can be really. There are no limits in terms of challenges. Again, I would say the non-technical challenges, in my opinion, are the most severe, because just to make an example, for the more advanced city in this prototyping exercise is undoubtedly Ferrara. Ferrara in Italy, we already benefited from participating as project partners in, let's say, local meetings of these local committees that have been already established with some also legal act, in the sense that a lawyer, a freelancer with some legal expertise has been appointed to take an eye on us, because if there are, in this case, there are agreements to share some data between institutions which are for the flood system. No, the department of the municipality dealing with the sewage system. Then another consortium that is dealing with the irrigation and the drainage in the rural area, which is, let's say, is creating a strong impacts and severe risks on the urban area. So different organizations need to find an agreement how to share the data in a proper way, And this is something that, of course, in terms of organizational, from the organizational point of view and from the more generic governance point of view, needs attention. And these, in my opinion, are the most severe challenges to be taken, but following the approach in which around the table are sitting people covering the different roles, not leaving uncovered any role in terms of economy, legal expertise, decision maker, policy maker. Each of them maybe also, as we said, in a small city, probably there are only 2 or 3 persons covering all the roles. In other cities, there can be more. And okay, this is my reply.
Yeah, I would just like to add to what already gracefully Giacomo answered. I think there is a step that we need to consider prior to reaching an agreement. And there is, let's say, and I think this is the question that I very often receive in conferences and in speakings. How do we convince private actors, for instance, to become parts of these agreements or to share data, right? So I think there are 2 levels for these answers. I think the first level is the fact that we need, in a way, all the actors that currently need information, as I think very nicely Monica said, we need information, but we don't want to see what is, I mean, we don't necessarily need to check all the data. So since we all need information, all actors need information, what is important to say is that we need to exchange data and we need to see an economic value in that, right? So if we see there a resource, then we will get into these agreements. And I think one way to convince people is through use cases. What do I mean through that? I mean that people need to see the value in stepping into this agreement because, for instance, thanks to having a data space, they will spare their times, they will have more efficient processes of data exchange, they will have more efficient tools for visualization. So services that can actually spare a lot of time, a lot of resources, and even to get better results on what they are already doing. So what has been already very fragmented and let's say burdensome can become something very efficient and even to bring some value. So that would be the first level of let's say of the answer. The second level, I would say, there is the so-called societal pressure, because we know there are, for instance, environmental organization, neighborhood groups and citizens who are actually eager to see what can be done, but they don't necessarily have a steering force, right? So when you provide all the tools based on what let's say on what is already built thanks to the data spaces, all the initiatives will start to have a sort of steering force, and they will, let's say, contribute to put pressure on all these actors to start to collaborate and share their data. So I think I just went a bit beneath the sort of agreements, because it's not an easy answer to say, okay, let's share data. I think the first question that any private actor or even a company or an organization will ask, what I will get from that, right? So I think we need to provide answer to that, and then all the other things that we already have a sort of standardized approach thanks to the data space concept will roll out easier. So I think I just tried to give you my perspective on how do we reach to those agreements to create data spaces. I think these are the 2, my humble opinion, answers. So yeah.
I see that Giacomo wants to
Yes, sorry, because I think I forgot to mention in terms of challenges, one very important aspect that we experienced in our project is that there is a strong need of a skilled workforce to operate everything. Because if at one end is true that what Monica greatly showed with that, for instance, the Copernicus data space ecosystem, which is one of the, let's say, of the main pillars of all these let's say activities ongoing, is make a great effort to provide as more information as possible, rather than making at the ecosystem level processing and so the quality of the products offered are more and more let's say close to the decision stage. No, so all the many technicalities are tried to be solved beforehand. But then, even though decision-ready information or other, let's say, access to visually data to be only visualized to take a decision, this needs some skill in order to fully take advantage of these extremely valuable products that are offered in the Copernicus data space ecosystem, as well as in other, let's say, platforms or sources.
Thank you, Giacomo. It's difficult to disagree with you, and I could also see Monica nodding in agreement. Maybe it would be a good time to, if we don't have any further questions for now, maybe it would be a good time to pass through our poll, where we would like to test a little bit what are against again the barriers. So you will be able to vote, and our first question would have to do with a little bit what we just talked about what would you consider the most significant barrier for data sharing within local data spaces. It could be coming from your personal experience or with the impression that you have based on your knowledge. So some of the barriers that could be potentially there are the concerns around data privacy, concerns around the lack of data standardizations, and the resistance from stakeholders, which we spoke about as well, and the lack of resources, which I think we can agree, following on what Giacomo said, is both financial and probably human resources in certain cases. The poll is anonymous, so please feel free to unleash your imagination. Let's move to the next one then. We talked a lot about governance and how it is complicated, but if we were to name one primary responsible, who would you think that would be for the whole governance of the local data spaces? Do you think that would be local authorities, or maybe the private sector and the business, or should that be given to academic institutions, civil society organizations, or anyone else? Maybe I would like to move to the next question then. So I think a lot of what we heard today has to do with the status quo of local data management. But how do we think we can improve it further? Would that be through AI, through cloud storage solutions, through the IoT devices, through edge processing or technology, or through more strict implementation of principles such as the FAIR principles or other principles governing interoperability of data? Which one do you think would weigh in the most in the future improvement of data management? Maybe let's move to the next question, which is our second to last. So, which do you think is the greatest benefit of creating local data spaces for the community or locality? So even at the most, at the closest to us level of that. So do you think that the major benefits would be the improved decision-making using data-oriented insights? Do you think it would mostly be beneficial for increasing collaboration across different sectors? Or maybe it would eventually translate into better resource allocation and efficiency? Or it would also have the added benefit of enhancing data security and privacy? I would invite you to mark the one that you see as the most important for you in terms of potential benefits of implementing local data spaces. And moving on to the last question. What is the biggest challenge to ensure the sustainability of local data spaces for you? Is it the long-term funding? Is it ensuring the data quality and the data relevance over the time? Or is it ensuring equitable access for all stakeholders when it comes to local data spaces? Can we all see the results now? So maybe to quickly go through them. So it seems that the most significant barrier to data sharing with local spaces has been the resistance of stakeholders, with almost half of us having unsurprisingly put their vote there. When it comes to the primarily responsible for governing local data spaces, there's overwhelming agreements that should primarily be on local authorities. And of course, as we see from the results, that should also not happen independently from the private sector and involving other stakeholders. But the agreement seems to be that it should be on the local authorities to do that. When it comes to technologies, the most important tool for improving local data management seems to be cloud storage solutions, which is very, very appropriate considering the topic of today's discussion, and is very closely followed by the FAIR principles, probably in aim to build these solutions sustainably. When it comes to the greatest benefits, it seems that is again the improved decision-making through data-oriented insights, and probably has to do with the versatility of where data can serve into so many different policies or cross policies. And lastly, the biggest challenge to ensure the sustainability, it seems to be the data quality and relevance over time. Before I wrap up, I would like to ask our experts today, Monica, Natalia, and Giacomo, if they have any comments on these results, if they saw something they were surprised in, or if it mostly confirmed their understanding of this very complex ecosystem.
Who's first?
Maybe just to first of all, sorry, because I had some issues in looking at the polls, but then I'm hearing from your, let's say, what you presented, I understood that when there was the question about the technologies mostly having the greatest potential to improve the local data management, I heard that some replies were pointing to the FAIR principles. Let me highlight that, at least in my opinion, I would rather consider the FAIR principles as guidance, how to ensure that the findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability are achieved according to these principles. And then, let's say, the technologies can be many to ensure that. So for me, I don't want to, let's say, lower the importance of the FAIR principles, because they should be at the top of the pyramid or at the bottom in terms of, let's say, pillars to sustain the overall infrastructure above. But then probably at local city, I would say that, for instance, the Internet of Things, for instance, as a technology to enable measurements of environmental variables and other type of parameters, with all the technologies behind, also to streamline the flows of these data, can be important.
Thank you, Giacomo. I think it's very important to contextualize indeed. Natalia or Monica, would you have anything to comment on the results?
Natalia, you want to? Okay. Well, I first have to say that those were very interesting and tricky questions, in particular considering the choice of responses, because each one was a little bit relevant for every question. For me, it's in fact, I was happy to see that that for the local data management was the preferred solution. I would be, well, we don't have room for it, but I would be very interested to understand why. I know why. Well, I can say it. I personally think that it was the best answers from what we had here, but why others also thought it? This is quite interesting. Is it because we are a bit afraid that we will give the control to some anonymous artificial intelligence who will profile us or not? But this is just a side question. I would say additionally that long-term financing, sustainability, or anchor customers for the data spaces are also very important because it takes time to get used to technology and to the information. So if you don't have this time, it will be very difficult to get something mature.
I would only add from my perspective one thing that I would like to connect two questions. The first one was that still the local authorities are seeing those that should be taking the lead to establish data space, which I think is very interesting. I've heard very often this answer. And if we ask local authorities, then they sometimes see it as an additional burden, which we need to somehow convince them that it is not. It's actually a way or an approach that actually brings together different initiatives under the same hat, and if properly executed, it can actually bring more efficiency, but also spare a lot of time and provide value. But the other thing that I don't really want to crash anyone's dreams, but the other question that sounded to me very interesting is that data-driven solutions will improve decision-making. Well, yes, this is the so-called expectation, and this is what we hope, really. But I was reading recently some interesting scientific articles where the analysis was exactly that. So how much of the current decisions are actually based on data-driven, let's say, insights? And the question is not so many. The answer is not so many, because we need to make a sort of slight distinction between decision making and policy making. So if we really expect that some really concrete actions at the policy level will be improved, say, based or thanks to data-driven solution, then the answer is not so. It's not true. It's not straightforward. Very often at the policy making level, political actors have to balance a lot of interests, a lot of, let's say, different groups, competing interests, competing needs. And the answer is not so, let's say, optimistic, at least as of now, because, well, yeah, in an ideal world, data-driven solutions would be those that we expect to be at the, let's say, at the base of these decisions, but it's not always so. So I wouldn't want, but these are the results of these current researches. Maybe in the future we'll make some more progress and try to see, of course, how many of the decisions taken at the local, regional, and national level are actually driven by data-driven tools and informed by the wealth of information that we have. I think this is, let's say, a call to action to see how much indeed we are in that direction. But yeah, this is what we see currently. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Natalia. I think it's very nice to wrap up today with a call to actions. Once we have already talked about the importance of data spaces and the potential they have, and then we also talked about the intrinsic complexities that there are there in terms of stakeholders, data, managing to putting everything together. It is also very nice and inspiring to see that there's like people like three of you leading the change in possibly the right direction. So I would like to thank you very much, Monica, Natalia, and Giacomo, for sharing your time and expertise with us. I would also like to thank everyone for sharing their time and spending this Thursday morning with us. please stay tuned for other webinars. And I would like to, maybe before wrapping up, just give the floor to Monica.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask, could I share just a front page of a presentation that was last month somewhere? It's from the Commission. I think it could at some point be relevant. There are so many disclaimers that I couldn't use the content of it, but I will tell you that there was such an quite interesting presentation with use cases about greenery somewhere. Yeah, so just a highlight. Sorry to add. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice rest of the day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.